Well, hello, everyone. It's John Lawfare here. I'm the director of FPD International, Forum for Democracy International. Speaking to you this week in Paris. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome our co-host, Aaron and our guest, Aaron Day, the fellow of the Brown Institute, CEO of the Daylight Foundation, Chaylin Lim, who is an expert on cryptocurrency, and Tracy Thurman, who is, as I understand it, Tracy, lawyer for Roger Ver. We're discussing lawfare, the use of the judicial process against political opponents, and we're taking the case of Roger Ver as an example of this, but it's a subject we've discussed before. Aaron, perhaps I could start with you. How did you start to get involved in Roger Ver's case?
Well, I actually started following Roger in 2012. In fact, Roger is the one who initially introduced me to Bitcoin. And I had done a podcast with Roger. He recently wrote a book called Hijacking Bitcoin. And we had just completed that. And it was like 3 weeks later that he was arrested in Spain. So I basically started following the case immediately from the time he was arrested and have been doing everything that I can to kind of get the word out since.
And when was he arrested?
I believe he was arrested in late April. The date was kind of fuzzy. Tracy probably has more specifics on that, but I believe it was late April. It wasn't released that he was arrested for quite some time, so I don't know the exact date.
I believe he was arrested April 26th.
Of this year?
Yes, of 2024.
Yeah. And Aaron, you obviously had an interest in libertarian issues, if I can call them that. In freedom, in personal freedom, before that. And of course, the Brownstone Institute, which you are a member of, does fantastic work on that. Perhaps you could tell us something more about that.
I've been a serial entrepreneur, and I turned into a political activist after one of my companies was destroyed inadvertently by the government. And so I became 100% dedicated to liberty activism, moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project, which is a movement to get 20,000 people to move to New Hampshire and make New Hampshire the beacon of liberty on earth. And that's where I got involved with cryptocurrency. And after spending a lot of time on the politics side, I realized politics isn't the answer, and that cryptocurrency really is cryptocurrency and blockchain technology in general is a better way to promote freedom. And this has been Roger's message from the very beginning, from the very first time I saw him speak in 2012. And after what we saw with COVID, I noticed that some of my friends were being targeted by the federal government for their activities that were at the intersection of crypto and the promotion of liberty activism. And the US government started cracking down completely on crypto, and I wanted to look into why. And it turns out that the cause of the government crackdown on cryptocurrency is to shut off competition so that central bank digital currencies can be rolled out without any interference or friction. And so I have basically focused and spent 100% of my time educating people about the risks of central bank digital currencies, and then also teaching them how to use alternative currencies such as privacy cryptocurrencies, gold and silver as an alternative.
CBDCs, which of course, Aaron, are used not to liberate people, but instead to control them, as many of their advocates have said. Tracy, you're Roger Ver's lawyer. He's, I believe,
I'm actually not an attorney.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Actually not I'm not an attorney. I am leading the campaign to secure a pardon for him, but I am not an attorney.
Okay, but you're speaking, I think, on his behalf. You're leading a campaign to free him. Is he in Spain?
He is in Spain. He is out on bail on the island of Mallorca. He is not allowed to leave the island and has to check in every couple days. He has to go to the courthouse and check in. So he's not able to leave the island at all.
And when you say that you are seeking a pardon, surely a pardon is only for someone who's already been convicted.
That's a common misconception, but it's entirely possible to receive a preemptive pardon when it's so clear, as the facts are in this case, that the case is an utter miscarriage of justice, and that to allow it to go forward would be a travesty. And we believe that it to be the case here, and so we're seeking a preemptive pardon to prevent the lawfare from continuing against Roger.
Just for context, what is the backstory, just for context?
I'm happy to give it if you guys would like.
Yeah, go for it.
So this really goes back decades, to be honest with you. In the year 2000, Roger was living in Silicon Valley, California, where he grew up. And he had been interested his whole life in entrepreneurship and in the ideas of freedom. He was already very concerned about the actions of our government against its own people and against people abroad. And so in the year 2000, he was 21 years old. He decided to run for office as a libertarian. And in the debate with the Democrat and the Republican candidates, he talked about the things that concerned him. He talked about the fact that he disagreed with some IRS policies, but the thing he talked about that got him into trouble the most was the ATF, which is the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And he talked about what they had done in Waco, Texas in the early 90s. He called them jackbooted thugs and murderers, which he called them because it's what they are. In Waco, Texas in the 1990s, they had incinerated and burned to death children intentionally, purposefully, with every opportunity to have not done so. And then ATF agents were posing over the bodies of these children, the charred remains of small human beings. And this had horrified Roger, as it horrified any American with a conscience. And so he spoke about this in this debate and called the ATF out for what they are. And the ATF heard it, and the ATF did not like it. So they decided to pursue a campaign against Roger Ver. And they began the process of show me the man, I'll find you the crime. And Roger had been selling fireworks on eBay, which was a thing many people were doing at that point. eBay had, believe it or not, a guns and ammo section where it was legal to sell these things. And there's a type of fireworks that are used for pest control. So they're allowed to have a higher explosive contents than the kind you use as a consumer. And many people were selling these on eBay. They were buying them from the company who was making them. They were buying them from the Cabela's catalog, which, any American sportsman will know what that is. And they were selling them. Nobody not one person who was selling these had any type of explosives license. Nobody knew they needed an explosives license. But the ATF decided there was one person selling these that did need a license. And of course, that person was the one person who had criticized them. And that was Roger Ver. And so they began a campaign against him. There's evidence that they attempted to entrap him to make more sales, to make their case stronger. Roger didn't fall for it. And then they went ahead and indicted him. Only him again. No one else was selling these. And in a meeting and in case there was any doubt that this was a political persecution, in a meeting between Roger's attorney, the prosecutor, and the ATF, Roger's attorney was saying, look, there's many people doing this. This is not an imprisonable offense. At most, you'd say, hey, go get a license, maybe a fine, but nothing more than that. The prosecutor seemed to be agreeing with this assessment. And the ATF agents pounding his fist on the table saying, but you didn't hear what he said about us. So it was a political prosecution from the beginning. And Roger ended up serving 10 months in federal prison for this, which with the work I do, I've spent a lot of time in prison environments, dealing with other cases. That is not an environment you'd wish on your worst enemy. I recommend people watch the video Roger made about the horrific experiences he had in prison. But when that ended, he decided he had to leave the United States because he was no longer going to be safe here if an agency like the ATF was out to take him down. And so that's really how the lawfare against Roger began. It was more than 2 decades ago. And that was long before this current case. And if you'd like me to tell more about the other current case, I'm happy to.
Yeah, indeed. I was going to say, when did the current case start? And you just before your answer to Germ's question, you talked about a miscarriage of justice.
Yes.
Again, these terms are used generally at the end of a legal procedure, but as I understand it, the current one hasn't started yet. You're trying to resist.
No, it started. He's been indicted. He's awaiting extradition. Many motions have been filed. So the process is well underway.
He hasn't faced trial yet in the States.
That's correct.
You're saying it's a miscarriage of justice already.
Yes.
That he's been indicted and that other things have happened. Perhaps you can elaborate on that.
Absolutely. So, Roger left the United States in 2006, and then he began seeking alternative citizenship because he realized for him, given the lawfare that already existed against him, it was not going to be safe for him to remain an American. So in 2014, he finally succeeded in achieving his goal of attaining other citizenship in St. Kitts and Nevis in the Caribbean. And so he finally renounced his U.S. citizenship. And as an American, when you renounce your U.S. citizenship, you have to pay an arguably completely unconstitutional property tax, an exit tax. And this exit tax, you have to do what's called a hypothetical constructive sale of all your assets, meaning if you have to assess if you had sold everything you owned the day before you left, anything over $2 million in value, you have to pay capital gains tax on. And so Roger knew this. He wanted to comply perfectly. So he provided documentation to his attorneys. And this is provable, by the way, that he provided this documentation. He provided his attorneys with absolutely everything, evidence of everything he owned, and told them very explicitly, I know the IRS is after me. I know I'm going to be audited. Do this perfectly. I need this to be done perfectly. Those were their instructions. And people shouldn't have to take my word for it. There's a motion to dismiss being filed today. I encourage anyone to go read it because it actually contains all these emails. And it contains the IRS, we know, has these emails because in 2017, they decided to raid Roger's attorney's office. Armed agents with guns raided his attorney's office. They raided his accountant's office, and they raided Roger's office all at the same moment. And they took many documents they had absolutely no right to that are under, in the United States, we have what's called attorney-client privilege. And under attorney-client privilege, the relationship between the client and the, and the attorney is a sacred one, other than extremely rare circumstances, like if you were my attorney and I said that I'm going to commit a violent crime imminently, that would be something you could report. But outside of that, that relationship is sacred and anything that happens is confidential. And so the IRS flagrantly violated his attorney-client privilege rights, stormed this office, interrogated his attorneys, and took huge amounts of data that they had absolutely no right to. But because they did that, we know they have all of this evidence that Roger is innocent because they took it themselves. And it's all in this motion to dismiss that's filed today. Again, I encourage people to look at it.
But that was 7 years ago. That was in 2017.
That was 7 years ago, right.
And the arrest has only come through now via the Spanish
Well, there's a statute of limitations of 10 years. And so during this time, Roger has made entreaty after entreaty, approach after approach, the IRS saying, look, if you disagree with the number that that the top expatriation law firm in the United States came up with, if you disagree with what you think with what I owe, please tell me what you think I do owe. I'm law-abiding. I'm willing to pay it, but I don't know what you think I owe, so tell me. They will not do it. Roger's attorneys have gone ahead and filed a Freedom of Information Act request trying to get this information out of the IRS. They won't even respond to that. We don't even know if they know what they think Roger owes because we don't think this is about Roger paying something he owes. This is about silencing the man himself. This isn't actually a tax case. But yes, so he was indicted in
as I understand it, and by the way, Aaron, and I'm going to come to Che in a minute, but you're welcome to jump in. You don't have to wait for me to ask you to speak if you want to say something. But as I understand it, the silencing that you're referring to, Tracy, is about his book in which he explains, or claims anyway, that the intelligence services are trying to penetrate cryptocurrencies in order to control them in the way that Aaron said a moment ago in his introduction. Is that your claim?
That's part of it, but it actually goes far beyond that. You see, most people don't know, but Roger has been quietly funding movements that the U.S. government hates for a very long time. Roger has been funding the anti-war movement in the United States. He has been funding the anti-lockdown movement in the United States. He's been funding the medical freedom anti-vaccine mandate movement in the United States. He's been funding dissident economic organizations like the Foundation for Economic Education. And he's also, and probably most significantly, a major funder behind WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And so I think that as much as it's about hijacking Bitcoin, it's about shutting down a man who has been quietly funding the resistance. Because if you can take him out, the resistance to the government censorship regime, to the government vaccine mandates, to the government lockdowns, all of this, which they could bring back at any time, the resistance to all of those will become far weaker without Roger. And I think that is at least as important as the story of hijacking Bitcoin and why they're doing this to him. And because he's been so quiet about it, the hundreds of thousands or even millions of Americans who have benefited from what Roger has done don't know what he's done, but the government does, and that's why they want him gone.
Oh, they don't know what he's done, and I think you can take a look at, even outside of hijacking Bitcoin, the issue of CBDCs more broadly. I mean, who is going after Roger? The IRS is going after Roger. What is the IRS? The IRS is a collections agency for the Federal Reserve. That is their function. The IRS was formed the same time the Federal Reserve was formed. How does money work? The federal government issues an IOU to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve creates money out of thin air in an Oracle database, and then the IRS serves as a collections agency for that. What Roger has been promoting is peer-to-peer digital cash for the world. From the very beginning, what he has been laser focused on is the fact that central banks and this form of money funds violence and war all over the world. So as we sit here today, potentially on the brink of World War III, this is something that the central banking model funds incredibly well and is responsible for structurally. And so Roger has been out promoting alternatives. One of the things that we learn about Bitcoin is that Bitcoin can be tracked. You can actually find out who is moving, whose transactions are whose, because it's all stored on a public blockchain. One of the other things that Roger was doing immediately before he was arrested is he's been promoting privacy coins as an alternative to CBDCs. In particular, he introduced me to a cryptocurrency called Xano, which is a privacy cryptocurrency, and this actually goes right to the heart of central bank digital currencies and what they're trying to build. And just to talk really briefly about the end game here, what they're literally working towards is a scenario where we have a single global digital currency backed by energy credits that is tied to a social credit system that is essentially made up of the components of the UN 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So they're looking at digitizing and tracking not only money, but all of our non-monetary assets, stocks, bonds, our homes, our cars, our computers, all of our physical assets. And Roger was out there promoting alternatives to that. So I look at it in some way where they wanted to stop Bitcoin Jesus from becoming Xano Zeus.
Che, I think you agree with that. You're a specialist on cryptocurrency, and I think that perhaps you'd like to give us your assessment of the political significance of Roger's arrest.
Yeah, so the reason why I entered the libertarian space was 2008 when I watched the Ron Paul movement, and back then I was very ideological. I thought that through politics we could change society. Until I discovered Bitcoin, then I thought, you know what? The masses have given up on capitalism. Those who still believe in capitalism should give up on the masses. Let's try and create our own societies using the technologies that bring people closer to the worldview we have. And I believe that politics, or trying to convince people in a political way, it doesn't really help very much. Instead, we can try to promote technologies like crypto and blockchain and bring them closer to us. Because fundamentally, crypto for me is about self-sovereignty. And when I think about Roger Ver, I always see him like the Bitcoin Jesus guy, the guy who actually walks the talk, the guy who's not only intellectually libertarian, but a practical libertarian. This is something that the world is missing. So from that perspective, I fully understand why Roger Ver is promoting privacy coins. I fully stand behind that. He has such a huge influence on the space. So yeah, he is a threat to society and a threat to CBDCs, like Aaron said.
Aaron, you did indeed just say something very interesting. You said, which I hadn't, I suppose, realized, or only half realized, that Bitcoin can be tracked and your payments can be tracked. Can you perhaps explain that to me and to our listeners, and the difference between the fact that there are these other currencies of which you say that they are indeed completely private?
So Bitcoin is a public ledger. So essentially, you can look at Bitcoin as a form of a database. Usually, most of the economy runs on central databases, like a Microsoft database or an Oracle database, and these are databases that are centrally controlled and where you can go in and edit transactions. But blockchain changes that, and with Bitcoin, every 10 minutes, new transactions are added to the blockchain. And you can't reverse these transactions. But the thing is, everybody gets a copy of the database every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, new transactions are added, and then everybody gets a copy of that. And it turns out that all of these transactions are transparent. It is what's called a public ledger. And so now the US government and others have been using chain analysis techniques to be able to track people's transactions. And they've used this in a variety of ways. They used this against Ross Ulbricht. They used it against Roger. They've used it against many others. And they're probably in the process, frankly, of mapping out everybody's transactions. And so while there are some things that you can do to protect your privacy on Bitcoin, it's very difficult. And so you shouldn't, have to have an IQ of 150 and 15 years of programming experience in order to make your money private. And so this is a big flaw that people are now realizing and understanding about Bitcoin. And because you can track individual Bitcoin, it means that you could create a whitelist or a blacklist. You could say people can't spend, you can only spend these pre-approved Bitcoin, and these blacklisted Bitcoin can't be used at all. So this is a very serious problem, particularly if you're concerned about central bank digital currencies. And in a way, Bitcoin may become a backdoor CBDC itself.
But surely the traceability applies to any form of scriptural money, even a very primitive form of scriptural money, like a check.
Well, yes. I mean, one of the things I've been arguing, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we already have a central bank digital currency in the United States. I've actually spent a lot of time studying this issue. Most of the money in the United States is digital. It's stored in an Oracle database, and it can already be tracked. There are 13 different programs tracking U.S. citizens' financial transactions in the U.S., including the IRS using AI now to work with banks, the NSA doing bulk data collection. You have the Patriot Act where they're coming in and actually seizing people's bank accounts, and you can't even talk to anybody about it, including a lawyer. So I would actually argue we already have a CBDC. It's now just about the layer of tyranny that we're at, and everybody is ratcheting up tyranny. No one is, from the standpoint of at the government level or at the central bank level, reducing the amount of tyranny. It's only going in one direction. And so there are technologies and blockchains that are privacy focused, where all of the transactions are not open and available on a public ledger. And those are the kinds of things that Roger was trying to introduce to people.
And
I'm not sure.
I would like to add one more thing to this, is that an additional threat from a CBDC is that it is programmable. So you can program the CBDC in such a way that certain people are not allowed to do certain things with the coin. This was not able. People were not able to do this before. So I think that with the introduction of CBDCs, it's much, much easier to really impose a tyrannical financial system upon all of us.
Well, and I'm going to add, you can actually program the existing money today. There is something called the MasterCard Doconomy card, where people were voluntarily signing up for this, where it actually tracks your carbon usage and then shuts off your MasterCard based on whether you use too much carbon. That is possible within the existing banking system. We also have in the US health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts, which are basically cards that you get tied to a bank, where you can only buy pre-approved healthcare items at certain times and from certain retailers. And so the existing system can be programmed, but certainly their plan is for more programmability. And this is something that nations are actually combining efforts to create one global standard, so that all of everyone's assets are on basically a centralized ledger that can be programmed, tracked, and censored globally. And that is the end game of what they're pushing for. And there is a single global technocracy with this type of digital currency.
I don't know who to direct this question, either Aaron or Tracy, but Bitcoin doesn't exist within the framework of any type of national currency. It sits outside of it, so it's not regulated. With that in mind, how do they go about criminalizing any activity with Bitcoin?
Aaron, you want to tackle this one?
Well, it doesn't exist within the government structure, although the United States is now talking about possibly creating a Bitcoin strategic reserve. But one thing to note, because a lot of people think, oh, well, they can't touch my Bitcoin. As long as I have my keys, I have possession of my Bitcoin. Yet the United States government currently has 200,000 Bitcoin in its possession. Well, how did it get that? Well, it was able to get that using this tracking. And so once you can identify, so some of Ross Ulbricht's coins are in there. Ian Freeman, there are several people and situations where the government was able to identify the coin. And what they basically then say is, well, yes, you can hold on to your keys and not transfer the coins over to us, or you can stay in a cell for the rest of your life. And so hence people have been turning over their Bitcoin. And now the United States government has a reserve, I wouldn't call it a reserve. It has 200,000 that have Bitcoin that have been seized through civil asset forfeiture.
But that's theft.
But it is theft, correct. That is theft. But they're able to do it. So I think the important point is they are able to steal people's Bitcoin, and they have been doing this. And because the next stage of this is the IRS is going to start in the United States requiring people to report their self-custody crypto holdings on their tax returns. And so the next step from that is going to be you're going to have to register your Bitcoin. And then you're only going to be able to use Bitcoin that are on a pre-approved list for merchants and for commerce within the United States. This is the natural progression of how this is moving. And if you look at it, and again, Roger was all about saying Bitcoin is about peer-to-peer digital cash for the world. It's something that people can use on a day-to-day basis outside of the banking system. What are people doing now? They're buying Bitcoin through BlackRock ETFs. They're not even taking possession of the Bitcoin, and they're not using it for day-to-day transactions. I saw a stat that last month only 0.5% of Americans actually purchased something with cryptocurrency. This is down from 2%. So people are now just viewing this as an investment vehicle that you buy and never spend. But yet we still need peer-to-peer digital cash because that is the solution to central bank digital currencies.
On the other hand, we all have to pay our taxes. It's very annoying to have to pay taxes, but surely the objection to central bank money, and obviously by extension to central bank digital currencies, is that they will control what we spend our money on, and that central bank money itself is a form of theft because obviously it's printed out of nothing, as you said a moment ago, Aaron. But everyone is supposed to declare their income, even if it doesn't come through some, I don't know, official channel. And so the argument that Bitcoin is useful for not declaring your income, isn't that a bit tendentious?
Bitcoin isn't useful for concealing your income. Your transactions for Bitcoin are on a distributed ledger that is sent all over the world. So Bitcoin is not a this is part of what the governments do, right? The governments try to say, well, these cryptocurrencies are used for money laundering and terrorism, and of course that's actually not the case. It's the exact opposite. With Bitcoin, all of the money is tracked, and unlike cash, where if you actually have physical cash, that isn't tracked. Although they're working on technologies to do that as well. The U.S. dollar is used for more money laundering and terrorism than any cryptocurrency ever has been. But they're using that as the argument so that they can regulate and or shut down cryptocurrency so that they can roll out CBDCs. And they're very effective at making these types of arguments. Oh, you shouldn't have privacy. If you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about, even though that goes completely against the Fourth Amendment. So the arguments that they make about Bitcoin.
No, I was just coming back because you said a moment ago that you would have to declare your Bitcoin holdings. So that implied that they were otherwise not known about or not declared.
Well, there's been an ongoing debate about, is it a currency? Is it an asset? And this is something Tracy can talk to about Roger and the period of time that they're going after. The IRS didn't even know how to treat this, but now they're trying to require everyone to report their self-custody crypto holdings, whether you made money or not. This isn't even a question about whether or not you're paying your quote fair share of taxes. This is about them knowing what your assets are, so that they're moving towards a system where the only system you're going to be able to use are CBDCs and other assets that are on a centrally controlled system. That's why they're doing it. It's not going to yield a lot of tax benefits for them at all. It's about control.
What about Monero and the sort of hidden cryptos?
I would like to say that Monero and the hidden cryptos, the privacy coins, they are all forbidden to be traded on centralized exchanges, at least in Europe, that I know of. So if you want to continue making use of Monero, you need to really work outside of the centralized exchange system. centralized banking system and start making use of fully decentralized exchanges. And I assume the same thing is happening with Sano as well. Is that correct, Aaron? That Sano is not allowed to be traded on centralized exchanges?
I mean, it's on centralized exchanges, but not in the United States and Europe. Monero is, I believe, still available on the centralized exchange Kraken, but that's the only place that it is currently available. But yeah, usually you have to find these privacy coins through decentralized exchanges or through other venues. But they're not explicitly illegal. Like there's nothing in the United States that says you can't use these or that they're banned. I think that based on the Biden administration was incredibly aggressive. Biden passed this executive order 14067, which authorized the U.S. to explore CBDC as well as to crack down on decentralized crypto, but they didn't ban privacy coins. I think people were trying to get ahead of, and exchanges which were already under assault by the federal government were kind of trying to get ahead of this privacy coin issue. But who knows? With this change of administration, maybe privacy coins will become available again on centralized exchanges in the U.S.
Tracy, what is the status? You've asked for a presidential pardon, or Roger Ver has asked for a presidential pardon, but surely there's another avenue, and that would be to ask the Spanish authorities not to grant the extradition. After all, extradition is granted ultimately as a political decision, certainly in the United Kingdom. It goes up to the Home Secretary, and I assume it's the same in Spain. Are you having any success in that department or not?
Well, what's worth noting is that the U.S. waited very strategically for Roger to arrive in Spain before they attempted extradition. Even in just the month before he landed in Spain for 24 or 48 hours, he had been in several other countries. And in the 6 months to a year before that, he had been in many other countries. They didn't attempt to have him extradited there. They waited for Spain. Now, why did they wait for Spain? They waited for Spain because Spain is known to roll over like a dog in front of the U.S. government and do whatever they want, whatever they say it. They did this with John McAfee. They've done it with others. And so the U.S. government calculated they'd most likely roll over like a dog with Roger as well. We are awaiting a decision from the Spanish government on this. We hope they decide to fully vet the facts this time, to fully understand what the U.S. government's allegations are, and also to look at the fact that the U.S. government has lied to them explicitly in their extradition request, which is now, again, public knowledge. In the motion to dismiss today, it will be addressed that the U.S. government had all of this huge tranche of emails between Roger and his attorneys, and they carefully selected the lines that would make it appear that Roger had hidden data and that was therefore potentially on the hook for tax evasion. What the U.S. government actually has in this entire tranche of data is the evidence that Roger tried to comply perfectly. There's this idea of besides attorney-client privilege, there's the idea of reliance on counsel. And reliance on counsel is the idea without which freedom cannot exist in the tax context, because the tax code in the United States is hundreds of thousands of pages long. No, not one of us could possibly memorize all of it. Even the specialists have their own specialized area of it. And so because of that, it's utterly necessary that we have the right to depend on the advice of our attorneys, of our tax accountants, to get it right for us, because it's literally impossible for us to get it right alone. And so as long there's a 3-part test. Did you pick competent counsel? Did you listen to them in good faith? And did you provide them with every single piece of data? And if you satisfy those 3 prongs, it's called the neonatology test for the law nerds out there. If you satisfy those three prongs, that should be a bulletproof defense that should prevent an indictment from ever being brought. The U.S. government knows and has proof that Roger passes that with flying colors. They know he provided every piece of data, and they've been hiding that from the Spanish authorities. And so they've requested a fraudulent extradition, and the Spanish authorities know this, and we simply have to hope now that the Spanish authorities will make a decision in the interest of following Spanish law and stand up to this case where the U.S. government is simply not telling them the truth.
It's an incredible
we don't know though what they'll
situation.
do.
I mean, if you haven't paid your tax bill, you'd expect the tax authority to write to you and say you've underpaid, you need to pay more. And I gather that they haven't even said that.
No, and that's the thing. Roger did pay his tax bill. Roger paid it perfectly, paid it fully.
No, but I'm saying
to
you
the
don't
best
normally extradite
advice he
someone.
got.
You don't normally extradite someone
No.
to put them in prison for an unpaid tax. You send them a bill
Right.
and they can pay it. And if they don't pay it and they're a fugitive, then you might go to the next stage. But as I understand it, they haven't even presented him with a bill. Is that right?
And he's asked repeatedly, look, if you think I didn't pay the right amount, I paid it the best I could understand based on extremely unclear policies at the time. Most people won't know this, but anyone who is early to crypto does. Back in 2014, 2015, Roger was one of the only people in the world attempting to pay taxes on Bitcoin. Almost nobody else was paying it because it was understood to be a currency, not an asset in that sense. So he was one of the only people who was attempting to do this. And so how ironic is it that the one person who was attempting to pay their taxes is the one facing more than a century in prison for doing so? 109 years in prison for attempting to pay his taxes correctly.
Tracy, from the US government's perspective, what actually is his crime? I mean, can you put it into one sentence?
From their perspective, the crime is tax evasion. They believe that their claim, I won't say, but they believe because they have the evidence. They have the evidence at their fingertips that this is not true. But what they claim is that he did not provide fully to his tax accountants the evidence of everything he owned, and that he hid that information, and therefore, he is. They're charging him with tax evasion. But what I'm telling you and what you can see now in the motion to dismiss is the evidence that Roger declared everything, put everything in the hands of the experts, and then trusted the experts, which is what every good American does.
But it's clearly a witch hunt. It's yes. Not just about tax.
This is 100% a witch hunt. I would say it's not about tax at all. This is a Stalinist, show me the man, I'll find you the crime. And tax is the easiest way to take any American down because it's such a complicated system. It's so difficult to comply with perfectly. And this is why this case matters, because if they can kill the right to depend on your counsel in a tax situation, every American's going to become a criminal overnight. Every single person who speaks out about the government is at risk because none of us could possibly get our tax situations correct. Unless I have an extremely, basic tax scenario, but anyone with a remotely complicated situation has to be able to depend on the advice of experts. Otherwise, we're all criminals.
And Tracy, how do they get to the number of 109 years?
Well, I'll tell you, 20 years of that is simply for mailing in his tax return. It's a mail fraud. 20 years alone is for putting his taxes in the mail. This is how the U.S. government works. It's insanity. But so the other charges, I don't have off the top of my head exactly how many years are for which. But that should give you a good taste, right? The 20 years is for putting something in the mailbox.
But that is how the American judicial system has worked now for a very long time.
Yes.
Using what I would call and have called mafia tactics.
Yes.
We saw it obviously with Donald Trump, where he was accused of a slightly similar thing, as I understand, overvaluing his portfolio. Well, which property developer has not done that? And anyway, that's not exactly it may be financially wrong, but it's not exactly a criminal offense. And obviously that was political. But also going back in time, one of Trump's associates, Paul Manafort, who was originally involved in Russia, or allegedly involved in Russiagate. In the end, they ended up getting him, I think, on tax evasion. And in that case, if I'm not mistaken, they said to him, "Look, we've got this stuff on you on tax. You sing on the other stuff, and we'll reduce your sentence." So it's pure mafia tactics.
Absolutely, there's no question that this is pure mafia tactics, and I'm glad to hear you say that because I think 10 years ago, very few Americans would have understood that. But in the last 4 to 5 years, the boot has been on the face of far too many people, including Trump himself, right? And we're hoping that Trump will look at this case, look at what has happened to himself, what's happened to Jeff Clark, what's happened to Ken Paxton, what's happened to Tulsi Gabbard, what's happened to Matt Gaetz, what's happened to Bobby Kennedy Jr., what's happened to so many of the people around him. And he'll recognize this is a pattern. This is a pattern of lawfare. This is a pattern of mafia tactics. And this is a pattern of persecution against anybody who disagrees with the regime. And Roger is one of those people who is being persecuted. And we hope that Trump will be able to look at this, spot the pattern, and see this needs to end. This needs to end now. There's no point letting this play out, letting this poor man sit in prison for years, waiting for it to play out, because I can assure you, if he's extradited to the US, the chance they're going to want to give him bail is very low. He'll be sitting in a gang-infested, dangerous, violent cage, awaiting trial by a government who clearly has been out to get him for 24 years now.
But
so we need it to
Tracy-
end before they get a chance to do that.
But Trump wasn't very kind to Assange.
The people around Trump were not kind to Assange, particularly. I do not know to what degree Trump himself had a role in that. I do know that on Trump's last day, he was essentially told by Mitch McConnell that if you pardon Julian Assange, you will be impeached, you will be indicted, and we will take you down. Now, so and then Trump made the decision at that point to cave to the threat. We all know how that worked out for Trump when he caved. Did it prevent him from being impeached? Did it prevent him from being indicted? It did not. And so we're hopeful that this time around, Trump has become wiser. Trump has become more savvy. Trump has become more aware of the tactics and the tools against him, and that Trump will decide this time is the time to stand up.
Aaron, I expect you agree with our analysis. It's one of the great paradoxes of American life that it's a highly litigious society. Everything is litigated. There are more lawyers probably than any other profession in the phone book, and yet the country seems to be descending ever further into lawlessness.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely the case. I mean, I've been the victim of lawfare myself. I had to spend 5.5 years in a lawsuit trying to work my way out of it related to political activism. And, this is something no one's even heard of. So this has become common, and there are these little catch-alls that they can use. They can charge you for conspiracy. I have a friend that they went after him for money laundering. They dropped the money laundering charge, but ended up convicting him for conspiracy to commit money laundering. So they have all of these little knobs that they can pull to basically go around the Constitution and go around law to use these other processes, and they use it very judiciously. And the thing is, if you actually look at, I think I'm pretty optimistic about Trump for a variety of reasons on this. One, he has agreed to commute Ross Ulbricht's sentence, and I was in D.C. at that libertarian event when he announced that. But then also, Trump has also been targeted directly by the IRS. He has been subject to multiple audits, and he's also had his attorney-client privilege breached with Michael Cohen. So I think that there are real strong similarities between the two of them, and I think if we can get the word out there and just get this on his radar, I actually think he'll be very empathetic to what's going on with Roger.
Yeah, and you haven't even mentioned Steve Bannon.
Right.
As another victim of lawfare.
Yeah, what Steve went through is absolutely horrific. Absolutely horrific. And I think that at this point we're almost in the place where you can tell who's an effective advocate for freedom. You can tell who's an effective resistor to the regime. You can tell who is a threat to tyranny based on who they go after and how viciously they do so. And Steve Bannon was a victim at a level that few were. He's an incredible hero, and we're hopeful that Steve Bannon as well will see what's happening to Roger and see in Roger a brother in arms and somebody who should not have to suffer what Steve has suffered over the last few months in prison.
Jam, you want to go ahead?
Sorry, there we go. I was looking for my button. The location he chose, what's it called? I keep forgetting the name. Yes, I mean, I had never heard of that island until he went there. Why there?
St. Kitts is an absolutely beautiful place in the Caribbean. There are many people there who are freedom-minded, which if you're choosing to free a country that's tyrannically oppressing you is no small thing. St. Kitts also allows for citizenship by investment, which is key if you're looking for another place to call home. Where you don't have to marry a local, you don't have to be born there, because in many countries, of course, that's the case. So that's why he chose St. Kitts, and he also loves St. Kitts. It's a beautiful place. I would encourage any of you, if you get a chance, go visit. It's lovely.
It's like an upper class version of Jamaica.
I can assure you, it's not very much. It's very much unlike Jamaica, Jam.
But now you say he's in Spain, which is interesting because John McAfee's body, when I last heard, was still being held by Spanish authorities, which is very suspicious.
He was not planning to be in Spain for more than 48 hours. He was there for a conference, and they arrested him while he was there. They'd clearly been tracking his movements and waiting. And what's called jurisdiction shopping, right? They had been waiting for him to land in a place that they thought would roll over and cooperate, without looking closely at the indictment, without scrutinizing it and saying, does this match our laws? Does this match the US laws? What's missing here? And we believe that they chose Spain because they thought Spain, based on what had happened to McAfee, who by the way was a friend of Rogers, that Spain would be the place they could get this done most easily with the least scrutiny. And we're hoping Spain does not prove them right.
Aaron, if you're relatively optimistic about Trump, then you must think that, as I think Tracy suggested a moment ago, that people are beginning to understand what's going on. There's a wider understanding of the abuses being committed by the American state and by the IRS. In other words, that it goes beyond the personality of Donald Trump himself.
Well, I think this election showed that. I think that the fact that leading up to the election, people had their theories. It was going to be, razor thin, and this side is going to try to steal the election this way. This side is going to steal the election the other way. And clearly that wasn't the case. Trump won with a clear mandate. But the other big thing that came out of this was mainstream media in the United States is practically dead. And you see X and podcasts and other sources of information. So then if you look at the information now that's on X, and actually if you look at the information that's put out by groups like the Brownstone Institute, this has had a major impact on shaping and influencing people's opinions. For once, they're actually able to get access to real information instead of the programming that is done centrally through the mainstream media. So there is clearly a shift in people's attitudes, and there is clearly an understanding. It used to be in the past, if you ever got sued, for whatever reason, the public opinion would be, oh, you must have done something wrong. And I actually think right now it's the opposite. I think, to what Tracy said, follow who is being persecuted through lawfare, and that's where freedom is being fought. Those are the front lines against tyranny, and I think that's actually entering the public consciousness, and I think that's a great thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I write for the Brownstone Institute as well, by the way, and which is how Aaron and I know each other. And the impact that Brownstone has had has been very significant. The readership is well over 1 million. And if you had thought 4 years ago when Brownstone was funded, it would have this level of reach, this level of impact, it would have been surprising. But I think at this point, Brownstone has greater reach than MSNBC or CNN. And that's just Brownstone. Brownstone operating on a very small budget. And that's just the news portion of Brownstone, right? Then you have the fellowships that Brownstone offers to dissident doctors, dissident academics, to allow them to continue to pay their bills while they continue to speak the truth and do their research. So we have these alternate systems arising in the US, like alternate models, and they are arising alongside this skepticism toward the entrenched interests. And so I believe if we have ever had a chance at freedom, if we ever have a chance at ending the lawfare, if we ever have a chance for people like Roger Ver to get justice, this is the moment right now.
What do you think Roger himself is feeling right now? What is the mood?
There is no way to be facing what Roger is facing right now without being under an incredible amount of stress. To know that at any time now, the Spanish authorities could rule against him. And when that happens, if they rule against him, you're not informed. They don't come to your door and say, hey, just so you know, we've ruled against you. So you'll be extradited back to the US. They just take you. So he knows that at any time now, or whenever the Spanish authorities finish making their decision, at any moment, there could be a knock on his door. He could be driving somewhere. His car could be stopped. He could be taking a walk down the road, whatever it is. And at any moment, just with a snap of someone's fingers, his freedom is going to end. And it could be ending for 109 years. It could be the last moment of freedom he has, and he could die in a cage. He could never see his loved ones again. It's horrifying. utterly horrifying. And I got involved in this. I thank Aaron for being someone who talked to me about Roger's case, got me interested, got me concerned, got me involved. But I got involved for purely ideological and legal reasons, right? I saw the horrific precedents that were going to be set by this case, and the damage to freedom that was going to occur. But I really care about Roger as a person. He's a really wonderful human being. He's kind, he's empathetic, he's generous. I've never seen him treat a person in any way badly. And to know that someone like that is going to have everything in their life stripped from them, be put in a metal box for the rest of their life, it's horrific, it's dehumanizing, and he deserves far better than that. And so I'm really hoping that more people will come to care about this issue and at least give us 60 seconds of your time. Like, if you're watching this, go to freerogernow.org. You can see it in above Aaron's head in his box there, freerogernow.org, and take the 60 seconds to sign the open letter to Donald Trump requesting a pardon. It's going to take at most 60 seconds of your time, but it's 60 seconds that you can put toward a man not spending the rest of his life in prison. So please consider doing it. It doesn't matter where in the world you live. Anyone can sign this and anyone can support. So we thank anyone who's willing to do that for stepping up and helping.
You know that,
yeah, go ahead, Jay.
You know that 3 weeks ago, when I first met Roger, I could see how incredibly kind he was. He was like, have you downloaded the Seno wallet? I said, no. Please download it. Here, I give you some Seno. He immediately gives you $100. He's so extremely kind. And it really makes me so sad to think that a person like Roger could end up in jail. But at the same time, I asked him the same question, like, what is your mood now, Roger? And I can see that he's trying to be very optimistic. I cannot see that he's very stressed, although I understand he is stressed. So considering the circumstances, I think Roger is very strong. That's a very admirable attitude to have at this moment.
Tracy, what is your mood?
Very. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
Tracy, I was just asking, what is your mood?
Well,
How do you? I mean, are you optimistic?
I have hope. I absolutely have. If you had asked me before the election what our chance of success was, I would have told you that it entirely depended on the outcome of this election. So I am not by nature a very political person. I'm known in the U.S. for my work to defending farmers and food freedom. I'm not known for I've been involved in the crypto space for some time, but that's not what I'm known for. But this case was worth dropping everything for. So what my mood is laser focus on achieving a pardon for Roger. I've dropped everything else in my life to get this done. And I think if we ever have a chance, this is the moment. This is the moment in time to get it done because of the massive realignment, the massive shift in public views on Lawfare, the massive awareness that we have, and the fact that we have an incoming administration that's quite literally staffed almost entirely by victims of Lawfare. So if we ever had a shot at the decision makers recognizing what's occurring here and stopping it, this is that time.
Tracy, you spoke very movingly just now, but surely there is a judicial procedure. There was a case in the High Court in London just prior to the final stage of what then turned out not to be Julian Assange's extradition. Surely there must be a similar last hurdle in Spain, no?
Yes. So Spain has a step 1 and a step 2, and so if you get a ruling against you at step 1, then you move to step 2, and step 2 is where you would find out, where you would not find out the outcome until they take you.
Okay, good. Well, let's hope that with raising profile, at least perhaps the campaigners and Roger Ver himself can take it to step 2. Aaron, is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Well, I've started talking about this case in May, and I don't know Roger that well. I met him one time in 2012. Most of my interactions with him have been about political situations or lawsuits, not this lawsuit. And so I've had the opportunity to travel around the U.S. and travel now outside of the U.S. And everywhere I go, I hear more stories about how Roger has helped somebody out. I was just in Mexico City at a conference, and somebody said, oh yeah, just a few miles from here, Roger helped fund rebuilding homes for the people in the local community. I've actually heard from people from every continent except Antarctica. I've heard from people from Africa. I've heard from people from South America. It is incredible how many lives he's touched directly through his generosity and his financial support, in addition to the 40 different projects that he's listed on his website. So to me, I believe in this so strongly that, I have 14-year-old twins, and they've actually helped in some of these efforts. My daughter helped design a T-shirt. My son helped work on a website, because to me, this is the clearest case of right and wrong from a morality perspective that you'll ever find.
I would agree with that.
Well, listen, you've all been absolutely fascinating about this. Thank you very much indeed, Aaron Day, Tracy Thurman, and Chaylin Lim for your kindness in giving us your time. And I hope that in our own small way, we'll be able to raise awareness of this among our own viewers. Thank you all very much indeed for joining the forum, and we look forward to seeing you all again at the same time next week. All the best.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.